Has New York Giants head coach Brian Daboll lost the locker room? We're going to talk about that and more following the Giants' 30-7 embarrassing loss to the Tampa Bay Bucks. That's coming your way next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Tran, a credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find my written work. And as always, welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, to my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, folks. I'm not even going to talk in detail about what we saw today between the Giants and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because, I feel like every week I say the same thing about the shortcomings of this team, what goes wrong. It's the same thing. It's Groundhog Day as far as I'm concerned. Every time I have to do one of these shows after a game. What I want to talk about, however, is I want to take a look at the locker room. Has the locker room been lost? Has head coach Brian Daboll lost the locker room? I'm going to give you my 2 cents based on, the vibe I got in the post-game locker room, things I've heard, and just observations. Then in segment 2, we'll talk about changes that desperately need to be made. And, excuse me, on segment 3, we'll take a look ahead. The Giants on a short work week, and we'll just kind of take a little bit of a look ahead, and you'll see what I mean when I get to that segment. So that's our schedule for today. Again, thank you for joining me. Has Brian Daboll lost the locker room? Now, look, I want to start off by saying, I like Brian Daboll as a person. I do think he's got some merit as a head coach. I really do. But that said, I was a little perturbed by some of the things that I heard coming out of the locker room today. All right. Now, granted, only Malik Neighbors was directly criticized the coach, basically said, ask Daboll why I'm not getting the ball. And for what it's worth, I'm not surprised that Malik Neighbors was the only one who really came out and said that, because there have been little signs of Malik Neighbors just boiling over all along. And I'm not going to lie, it was a concern for me because I go back to Hard Knocks when we saw, the interview with Malik Neighbors, the draft, or not the draft, the pre-draft stuff at the combine, how Neighbors just, certain things he said just kind of made me say, okay, if things go sour and he comes to this team, it could get ugly. But that said, I understand where Malik Neighbors is coming from. He's frustrated, as is everybody else in the locker room. But here's why I think Brian Daboll is losing this locker room, or has lost this locker room. Every single week after a loss, we got to go back to work. We got to trust the process. We got to do this. We got to do that. Well, guess what? The process ain't working, folks. If it was working, the results would maybe be different. And it's not. Okay. It's the same results week after week after week. We see missed tackles. We see blown assignments, drop balls, you name it, lack of effort, whatever the case may be. This process is not working. And you sit there and you wonder, what did they do during the bye week? They were supposed to evaluate all this stuff. What did they do? What did they change up? Based on the results of today's game, I'd say nothing. I'd say the only thing maybe they worked on was whether or not, to get rid of Daniel Jones or not. Okay? They got rid of him. That didn't seem to solve the problem. Tommy DeVito, didn't really have a chance. It wasn't totally DeVito's fault. The offensive line wasn't that great, but DeVito also, there were times when I saw him hold on to the ball a little too long, which reminded me of Daniel Jones. But look, the process, this whole thing about trust the process doesn't work with this group. And to keep going back to it and doing it the same thing over and over and over and get the same results. What do they call that? Insanity. So right off the bat, I'm like, if I'm a player in that locker room and the coach is telling me, just trust the process, just trust the process. I'm like, look, dude, I'm putting my body on the line here. I'm getting beat up while some of these other guys are not giving their all. What process? Throw the process out the window and think of something else. That's why you get paid the big bucks. And we heard Jermaine Illuminor, we heard Darius Slayton, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence all say the same thing. They all question some of the effort by some of their teammates. They all had, doubts about it. Jermaine Illuminor was probably the most direct in saying that, he doesn't think everybody's given a full effort. Who do you think that's on? The players, yes, but the coach? You think maybe the coach would take these guys aside or see this and say, hey, you're not giving a full effort? Go sit your butt down on the bench. So, I just feel like things are spiraling out of control within the locker room. I feel like Brian Daboll's message to trust the process is falling on deaf ears. And I'm not sitting here and saying I blame the players because, again, these guys, there are enough guys in that locker room, and the majority of the guys, I would say, come in and they do give a rat's you-know-what about putting forth the best effort. And it's so frustrating. It's kind of like, if you're on a team and you have 5 people on a team, let's say, and 4 of the 5 are pulling their weight and the 5th person's just coasting right along, that creates resentment. That can create splintering. That can create bigger issues that already exist in the locker room. So I just feel like, Brian Daboll got to get control of this. He's got to get a hold of this. The processes aren't working. Whether he gives a different message, I don't know what that is at this point. I mean, quite honestly, the season, 6 more games, it can't come, the end can't come soon enough as far as I'm concerned if we're going to continue to see this type of play. But Daboll, and here's the other thing that I'll point out about Daboll. He came in here, he was hired for this job as an offensive guru, a guy who was a quarterback whisperer. Well, did he totally fix Daniel Jones? No. Think about it, folks. Daniel Jones had his best year. Who was calling the plays? It wasn't Brian Daboll. It was Mike Kafka. And I know about last year, you're going to say, well, what about last year? Well, last year, the injuries and stuff. You could throw last year out. But this year, you saw Daniel struggle. This week, you saw Tommy DeVito struggle. Tommy DeVito, to me, didn't look any better than Daniel Jones has. And again, I know the offensive line didn't play well, but those times when DeVito maybe did have an opportunity, held on to the ball too long. So what are we doing here? Isn't this what Daboll was brought in for, to help fix the quarterback situation, to help get this offense explosive? And he hasn't. The scores, the average points scored per game speaks for itself. This offense is worse with Daboll, the architect of this offense, calling the plays. How that is possible, I have no idea. But here we are. Here we are, folks. So, that all being said, changes need to be made, right? What changes can be made? And what are the pros and cons of the changes? We'll talk about that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free online courses, including literature, mathematics, fine arts, history, economics, and so much more. There's no better way to expand your knowledge and challenge your mind than to open it to learning something new from Hillsdale College's vast catalog of online courses. Enroll today for free at hillsdale.edu/lockedon. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. Again, that's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. Hey, Giant fans, Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Prize Picks is the only real money daily fantasy platform with an injury insurance policy so that your lineups stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. And right now, Prize Picks has a special Thanksgiving free square. Dolphins receiver Tyreek Hill only needs to receive half a receiving yard for the projection to hit. And if you're correct on at least one more stat projection, you can win real cash. Prize Picks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. You can get your earnings in as little as 15 minutes. And Prize Picks now offers Venmo for quick and easy deposits and withdrawals into your account this sports season. Download the app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Train, and coming up this week on Locked On Giants, I'm going to have a couple more shows for you on Tuesday, Wednesday. Thursday is going to be crossover Thursday, so yes, we will be airing a show on Thanksgiving. Friday, I'll have a recap of the Giants-Dallas Thanksgiving game, and then we'll send you off into the weekend. Another weekend without Giants football, which I think we all, at this point can use, especially if the games continue to go the way that they have. All right, let's talk now about changes. All right, at this point in the season, not a whole lot the Giants can do about the roster. It is what it is. But there are some changes that, Brian Daboll can make if he wanted to. All right. The key word is if he wanted to, which I don't think he does, but I'll throw him out there for what it's worth. First thing I would do, or I would advise him to do, give up the play calling, give it back to Kafka. Again, 2022 was a pretty good season for everybody. The Giants, surprised. They had a decent offense. Kafka was calling the plays there. Okay. I know Kafka called the plays last year, but again, I point to all the injuries and just the unsettled mess that the offense became. Daboll's not getting it done as the play caller. And, I get it. It's his call who calls the plays, but put your ego aside, Brian. Consider giving it back to Kafka and just go back to being a CEO type style head coach because it's just not working for you. It's just not. The other thing that I'll point out, Shane Bowen. Okay, now I don't think Shane Bowen is going to get fired in season, but let's be frank here, folks. Shane Bowen's not working out here. Okay, and here's what I think the problem is with Shane Bowen. His system is completely different than that of Wink Martindale's. So you spent 2 years drafting players to fit what Wink Martindale ran. Okay, Deonte Banks, press man cover. You brought in Bobby Okereke and you had him attack. And now you bring in Shane Bowen and all of a sudden, you're asking Deonte Banks to play more zone, which he's clearly not comfortable doing. You got Bobby Okereke wondering when the heck he's got to drop back and when he's got to attack based on what he's seeing. And he's not having the type of year that he had in the past. So to go from one system and do a complete 180 to another, that was foolish in hindsight. Okay. Sometimes change isn't always good. Now, I'm not saying they should have found a way to keep Wink Martindale, But if you started to build the defense going in one direction and now you bring in another guy who wants to take it in another direction, you're it's like starting all over again. And we continue to see the issues with this defense. We see the personnel issues. Dexter Lawrence can't stop the run by himself. The Giants had some veteran guys on there, and maybe this is a Joe Shane, critique, but the Giants, these young guys, for whatever the reason, either they don't fit or they're not being developed properly. And I'd like to think that, Andre Patterson's a really good defensive line coach. So maybe their talents aren't a fit, or maybe what they're being asked to do isn't a fit. And, is that on Bowen? Probably, because he's the one who's putting this defense together. And look, the next time the Giants stop the run, that'll probably be the first time this season because they haven't done it all year long. So I could see a scenario where at the end of the year, Bowen is one and done because the defense just, lately it's fallen apart. And it just, they've got talent on it, but they just can't seem to optimize what they have. And I don't know if it's because what they're asking them to do isn't a fit or they just, are they trying to jam a square peg into a round hole? I don't know the answer. I do know that the results haven't been very good. I mentioned Bowen. Here's another thing that I just don't get. So they're pulling Cordell Flott, who's a young developing corner, off the field for Adoree Jackson, who's only here really for 1 year and who isn't part of the long-term plans. Again, maybe a sign of desperation. I don't know. But, at this point, the season's got lost. Why not stick with Flott and let him continue to cut his teeth, so to speak, as a starter? I don't get it. I don't understand what they're doing. And I don't know if that's Bowen. I don't know if that's Daboll or a combination of the two, but there's just so many things wrong with this defense. And here's the sad thing, folks. The sad thing is there's talent on this defense. A lot of talent. But yet, they have one interception, that by Darius Muasso, a linebacker. Okay. What the heck's going on here? Go back to, are they not mixing in enough man coverage? Or, is it the scheme? Is it that they're playing a light box, too heavy a box? Whatever the case may be, it's not getting done. And this has been a recurring story with this Giants, not getting it done, not good enough. And it's killing them. It's absolutely killing them to where guys are if you didn't know any better, watching the game tonight, you saw guys that if you didn't know any better, you would swear they were making business decisions to avoid tackles or do half-baked tackles. You saw guys who would run and, their body language sort of suggested was like they were throwing up their hands in defeat. You just got the sense that the Giants didn't want this game as badly as the Bucs did. And that's disturbing. Again, that's on coaching. You've got to put these guys in the best possible position. And I know the coaches will say, well, we do that we know we've got to do that. But are we actually seeing that? We're not. The results speak for themselves. So, I don't know if Daboll is going to, sit and think about it. They've got a short work week now. They've got to get ready for Dallas on Thursday. I don't think they'll be able to make any of these changes that I'm talking about. But my gosh, it's getting late early. Okay? Matter of fact, it is too late at this point. This team is 2-9. They currently have the second pick overall in the draft. And you've got to wonder, you really got to wonder if they have the leadership in place. And I haven't even spoken about Joe Shane. I'm going to say Joe Shane for tomorrow's show, probably. I'll talk about him, devote a whole show to him, for those of you wondering why I haven't mentioned him. But this is bad. And I put this out on X or Twitter, whatever, it's called nowadays. I've been covering this team for a really, really long time. And, I went through this week with covering the team, and there was obviously a lot of emotion behind, the whole Daniel Jones benching, the demotion, and then cutting him. You could tell that guys were legitimately sad, that they, were upset that things didn't work out, that they took ownership of, what could we have done better and maybe to make things easier for Daniel. And I worried about that. I said, coming into this game, the Giants' energy was a big X factor for me. Would they come out fired up or would they come out flat? Well, we got our answer. They came out flatter than day old soda, or from our Midwestern people, day old pop. It's what it is. So, where do they go from here? Well, we'll talk about it right after this. Hey, Giant fans, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if they win. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the very same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and I'm just not talking about the game, folks. I mean, look, I think a lot of you saw the game, and if you didn't, I put the highlights or lowlights, as the case may be, over on New York Giants on SI. We're talking bigger picture here. And speaking of bigger picture, what is in the cards for this franchise moving forward? Because look, this team continues to circle the drain. John Mara, one half of ownership, spoke last month, said he didn't anticipate making changes in season or after the season. But if the locker room is being lost, how can he and co-owner Steve Tisch continue to let this happen? So here's what I think will probably happen. This is just my guess. Okay. If the Giants get their doors blown off by the Cowboys, who, by the way, they upset the Commanders, but the Cowboys have had their own problems. If the Giants go down to Dallas, get their doors blown off, I don't see how Daboll survives. And I know that John Mara does not want to make a change. I have said before that changing the coaching staff every 2 to 3 years means basically resetting everything. Now you've got a new guy comes in, he wants his own guys in here, his own systems, and all this work that you did to build all this stuff up now maybe gets thrown out the window. I know that. But again, I go back to what I said in the first segment. If the message is falling on deaf ears, if the players are no longer buying into the process, how can you continue onward? How many more embarrassments are you going to endure if you were John Mara and Steve Tisch? Okay? This just can't go on. It just can't. And, I get it. An interim head coach might give them a little tiny bit of a spark. And it might cost, win them a few games, which I know I can hear some of you say, well, we got to lose all the games we can so we're assured, a top pick. Yeah, but, after a while, think of the athletes. Think of the people who, spend their hard-earned money to watch this team, only to be let down over and over and over. So what could happen, and again, this is just my opinion, if the Giants have their doors blown off and if Daboll is fired, Mike Kafka will probably be named the interim head coach. Okay, Kafka is the assistant head coach. He's been groomed by Daboll to, learn more about being a head coach since he's been a head coaching candidate for the last couple of coaching cycle hires. That's how I could see it going. Because, if you're John Mara and you want to win, they'll have what? There's this this is 6 games left, so they'll have 5 games left. Does it pay at that point to make the change? It might, especially if you're going to make the change anyway. So things are unsettled with the Giants at the head coach spot. Daboll's seat is now broiling. All right. I don't know if there's just any magic he can pull out of his hat because the failures are starting to add up. And look, I've always liked Brian. I think when all is said and done, he's not a horrible coach. I mean, there have been a heck of a lot worse coaches that I've seen in all the years that I've been, covering the team, starting with he who must be not named, who followed Bill Parcells. Okay. Also, including Ben McAdoo, who just, I think, let success go to his head and started doing weird things that just totally lost the locker room and just wasn't consistent with the locker room. I don't think Brian Daboll falls into either of those categories. But that said, he's got one foot in the grave and one foot on the banana peel. And if he doesn't put his ego aside and start thinking about how can we get this out of the mud, then I don't know how much longer, people can justify keeping him within that organization. I just don't. And I think that would be a shame because I don't want to see them start over. But you've got to ask yourself at that point, if you do move on, do you want him having a say in the next quarterback that they bring in? Do you want him having a say in the next free agency cycle, in the next draft? That's what the Giants have to ask themselves. And that question only ownership can answer. And it's not an easy one at all. All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back tomorrow. Probably do a show on Joe Shane, similar to, the type of show I did today. But, not happy times in the land of the Giants. So hopefully this was therapeutic for you. I know it was therapeutic for me to talk about it. And Giant fans, I will see you tomorrow. Have a good one.